Hi, I'm Nick, Lime Green Squid. I'm here with a rant that I had on a journal. If I look like I'm reading from a script, it's because I wrote this and I'm reading from a notepad again. I'll admit, I prefer to be atheist. A, because overwhelmingly it seems to be the only likely reality. And B, because I like to be honest with myself and the world I see. If religious people understood that their beliefs were just preferences, a lot of strife would be avoided. If people realize that their own beliefs and the beliefs of others are all just preferences, instead of projecting things onto people that cannot be chosen, things that you can't just change your mind about, like homosexuality, that they're all just ideas that you prefer to cling to and not something born into you, as we are all born atheist after all. Along with getting rid of the rule in the most oppressive religions that basically says our spiritual preference out of the thousands on this planet is the only true spiritual preference. All others, given the exact same circumstantial evidence as ours and sounding as ridiculous as ours, are wrong, just because we say so. And we don't need to explain ourselves because we have faith, i.e., we prefer not to think about things we don't like and demand bizarre things to be true if we feel like it, with no requirement to provide any valid way to support our truth claims. Realizing beliefs are preferences and removing that holy rule will seriously work towards ending religious warring, the biggest cause of death in the entirety of human history, outnumbering the top 3 fatal illnesses combined. But no, too many religions are built upon that one holy rule, which in one fell swoop should indicate the corrupt nature of that religion. When belief is more important than the spiritual connection to the universe, or more important than the love and welfare of humanity, especially those who don't share the same spiritual preference or opinion, even to the point of restricting potentially life-saving research that requires the use of cells, little units that live and die in us in the billions daily anyway, just because it doesn't jive with their superstitions, as well as restricting people who love each other from choosing a life bond because, again, it doesn't jive with their superstitions, is just not something that's worth following. Their preference to believe in superstitions, I should say. If they prefer to believe in society-retarding superstitions, those that encourage bigotry and discrimination based on obsolete superstitious fear, let them, as long as they don't demand everyone else believe in the same superstitious fears, and as long as they don't act on them. Because while freedom of thought is one of our most important privileges, discrimination without valid cause is bad for everyone. And by valid discrimination I mean I will not discriminate against a homosexual just because he or she is gay. It would be just as silly as discriminating against a person for having brown eyes. But I will viciously discriminate against child molesters because, by definition, they cause near irreparable damage to others. Homosexuals do not, unless they happen to be child molesters, which are homosexual and heterosexual. You can't just group all into one. But then there are some religious people who think it's their duty to make sure everyone shares their cancerous superstitious bigotries and don't accept the idea that people may prefer not to adhere to them. And so they make up some bullshit to justify their brand of discrimination, such as their preferred devil supposedly making people do things to turn away from their preferred god. You start believing in shit like that and you can just about justify anything, and that's a scary thought. And even if it may start out as a mental illness within a certain person, it is always backed up by some passage in one of the many horrifying holy books. And yet atheists are the ones least trusted in North America? I mean, come on. Ever notice how many lies and deceptions are used by religious people to argue their cases? Forging prophetic documents after the fact, encouraging ignorance to unbiased factual scientific study, claiming faith in something that they've never seen. Hey, you know, faith is a form of lying if you think about it. While atheists go out of their way to use absolute honesty and facts to argue their point, and will also honestly state when they don't know something. Of course, I can't deny some rogue atheists who command 100% knowledge of no God and may try to falsify information. There are fundamentalists in every group. But we don't have a holy book that encourages that sort of thing, so it is a lot more rare. Plus, atheists don't have to commit any of those acts, since religion is its own enemy to anyone with any sort of intellect. Anything that requires you to do mental acrobatics just to avoid a fact or dance around a fact, twisting words around the fact just because it glaringly disproves your belief, is just not worth the brain power. Things that actually exist and can be studied and tested and don't require colorful language to hide flaws in their arguments are much more worth our time thinking about because they can actually benefit us. Or we can warn ourselves against their dangers. In fact, scientific study demands full honest disclosure of all flaws in its argument so that they can be scrutinized and analyzed and changed or removed if all the tests prove the argument to be wrong. At least the branches of scientific study that don't rely on capitalism to survive, like beauty products and diet products and bullshit like that. But what money do evolutionary scientists make? Maybe a few of them have written books, but that's hardly society-retarding, agenda-driven pursuit. So the question is, what amount of fully disclosed, flawed arguments do religious people willingly give out to be challenged, changed, or removed when proven wrong? Basically, it comes down to this. Believe in our preferred spiritual opinion, or go to our preferred version of hell. Our word is flawless, even though that word comes from a book that contradicts itself on every message it has an opinion on, but we don't ever admit that. And we cannot be challenged, questioned, or changed. And the rules cannot be questioned or changed. That's it? That's all they're going to give us? Many atheists can read word-for-word Bible passages to religious people more often, more thoroughly than the vice versa. And we tend to point out all the flaws in their flawless source books. We will read to them the straightforward, bigoted, sexist, homophobic, slavery-encouraging, mind-policing Bible passages that showcase how much of a brutal, evil tyrant their God really is, and they'll still say atheists haven't read the Bible. An obvious clue to the fact that those particular religious people haven't read it themselves. Or if they have, they ignore the parts that they don't like. So why bother have a holy book that's the 100% true Word of God if they can allow themselves to pick and choose and ignore all the parts they don't like or that don't justify their agendas? Such as the fact that many Christians will say the Old Testament is obsolete, that Jesus changed all the rules, but in the same breath will say they believe in the Adam and Eve story and parade around the Ten Commandments, as well as drudging up the infamous Leviticus 20:13, condemning homosexuality and ordering homosexuals to be put to death, because it suits their bigoted agendas, even though they come specifically from the obsolete Old Testament. Again, it comes down to preferences. They prefer the happy, peaceful, loving verses when they want to swell their flock, but use the discriminatory, violent, or superstitious verses when they want to hinder human relationships they don't prefer, or scientific research they prefer to be superstitious about. Feel free to prefer your own gods or rules. Just understand they are your preferences, and no one else is required to have them. My preference is toward atheism, as it's the only option that makes any sense to me. Why? Because I don't have to stretch my verbal or mental acrobatics to justify anything about it. I don't have to ignore facts or evidence. I don't have to selectively ignore the natural processes of the observable universe to come to my conclusion. How many religious people can say that? When a religion comes around that is completely open to scrutiny, actively encourages debate, doesn't rely on inventing ideas out of people's asses as answers to big questions, doesn't rely on falsifying evidence, the Shroud of Turin, dating to the 15th or 16th century, not the first, and Christian historians admitting that Christian tamperings of one of the 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus, big number for a world-changing Messiah, 4 eyewitnesses, a religion that doesn't rely on discrediting respectable, overwhelmingly factual and accurate scientific facts and theories to be replaced by ridiculous, impossible, or overwhelmingly unlikely speculations, i.e. the devil putting dinosaur bones in the earth to test our faith in the Bible's 6,000-year-old earth story. Anyone who doesn't laugh at the ridiculousness of that idea should be turned immediately into the direction of the nearest insane asylum. It's the epitome of pulling something out of your ass, next to the whole God gave us free will and God works in mysterious ways silliness. And if this religion has never relied on violence to spread its message of peace, as well as providing irrefutable evidence of its specific god or set of gods, then I might take preferential interest in it, beyond just my general interest in mythology. But since none of the major oppressive religions of this world have ever delivered on any of these terms, I will still prefer atheism. I will mention briefly that many of the smaller pagan religions have already met all but one of the above criteria, and I hold them in very high respect. But anything that relies on lies to further its influence and demands unquestioning faith needs to be questioned and have its historical record brought to light immediately so that everyone can make an informed decision rather than being forced into a belief structure just because they never knew anything else. What else would you prefer?